I was dreaming about the beach, white sand, blue water, no explosions, when the flight attendant's hand on my shoulder jerked me back to reality. My eyes snapped open, my body tensing instinctively before my brain caught up and reminded me I was on Flight 447 from Dallas to Boston, not in a cockpit over hostile territory. The woman standing over me in row 10 looked terrified, and that's when I heard the captain's voice crackling over the PA system, tight with barely controlled panic. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Reynolds. I need to know immediately if there are any pilots on board, preferably with multi-engine experience. Please identify yourselves to the flight crew right now. My name is Major Evelyn Eve Cross. I'm 36 years old. And I'd just woken up from the first real sleep I'd had in 3 days, still wearing my ratty college sweatshirt and yoga pants, looking nothing like someone who'd spent the last 12 years flying F-16s in combat zones across the Middle East." The cabin erupted into nervous chatter. I could see passengers looking around, some pulling out their phones despite the announcement to keep them off. The flight attendant who'd woken me, her name tag said Jennifer, was moving down the aisle, her voice shaking as she asked each row the same question. "Ma'am, I'm sorry to disturb you, but did you hear the captain's announcement? Do you have any pilot experience?" I was about to say no, about to let someone else handle whatever crisis was unfolding in the cockpit because I was on leave, because I was exhausted, because I'd spent the last 6 months flying combat missions that I couldn't talk about and I just wanted to go home. But then I saw it. The slight angle of the aircraft, the way we were descending just a bit too fast, the almost imperceptible shudder in the airframe that my body recognized even if my conscious mind hadn't caught up yet. Something was very wrong. "I'm a pilot," I said quietly. Jennifer's face flooded with relief. "Thank God. Come with me please. Right now." I unbuckled and followed her toward the cockpit, my brain automatically cataloging details. Boeing 737-800, probably 8 years old based on the interior. Full flight, at least 180 souls on board. Weather outside looked clear, so whatever was happening wasn't environmental. A man in a business suit grabbed my arm as I passed. "You're a pilot? You look like a college student. Are you sure you can?" "Sir, let go of me." My voice carried the command authority that had made men twice my age snap to attention. He released my arm immediately. Jennifer knocked on the cockpit door in a specific pattern. It opened and I stepped into a scene from my worst nightmare. The first officer was slumped in his seat, unconscious, his face gray. The captain, Reynolds, 50s, probably 30 years of commercial experience, had his hands white-knuckled on the controls, sweat pouring down his face. "Thank God," he breathed when he saw me. "Are you multi-engine rated?" "I fly F-16s. Multi-engine fighter jets. 12 years military, 8 years combat." I was already sliding into the first officer's seat, my hands moving on autopilot to check the instruments. "What happened?" "Tom collapsed 10 minutes ago. Heart attack, I think. We were cruising at 35,000 feet and then I started feeling dizzy, nauseous. Getting worse by the minute." Reynolds' voice was slurred slightly. "I think it's carbon monoxide." The environmental system warning light came on right before Tom went down. "I've depressurized and gone to emergency oxygen, but I'm fading fast." My blood ran cold. Carbon monoxide in the cockpit was one of the deadliest scenarios in aviation. Odorless, colorless, and by the time you realized what was happening it was often too late. "Have you declared an emergency?" "Yes. Boston Center cleared us direct to Logan, but..." He swayed in his seat. "I don't think I can make it. The controls feel like they're underwater. Everything's getting fuzzy." I grabbed the oxygen mask and pressed it to his face. "Stay with me, Captain. I need you conscious for as long as possible." I keyed the radio. "Boston Center, this is Flight 447. I'm a military pilot, F-16 qualified, taking control of the aircraft. Be advised, both pilots are incapacitated by suspected carbon monoxide poisoning. I'm declaring a mayday." The controller's voice came back immediately, professional but urgent. "Flight 447, roger your mayday. We have emergency equipment standing by at Logan. Current distance 23 miles. What is your flight status?" I scanned the instruments. "Airspeed 280 knots, altitude 12,000 feet and descending, fuel state adequate. Autopilot engaged, but I'm going to need to hand fly the approach. Captain Reynolds is still partially conscious. First officer is unresponsive. Copy 447. You're cleared direct to Logan, runway 27. Weather is clear, wind 270 at 8. Do you need vectors or can you navigate?" I looked at the flight management system. "I can navigate. I've never landed a 737, but I've put an F-16 on a carrier deck in a sandstorm. I'll figure it out. Reynolds made a sound that might have been a laugh. Your Air Force? Yes, sir. Been flying since I was 18. Just finished a deployment 3 days ago. I adjusted our descent rate, feeling the aircraft respond. It was sluggish compared to a fighter jet, like flying a bus instead of a sports car, but the principles were the same. How many landings have you done in this aircraft? 3,000, maybe more. His words were getting slower. Approach speed 140 knots. Flaps 30-inch. Stay with me, Captain. I need you talking. I turned to Jennifer, who was standing in the cockpit doorway, her face pale. Get me someone who knows this aircraft. A deadheading pilot, an aviation mechanic, anybody who can talk me through the systems. She nodded and disappeared. Reynolds' head lolled. Spoilers on touchdown reverse thrust, his eyes were closing. Captain Reynolds. I shook his shoulder, but he was out. Damn it. I was alone in the cockpit of a commercial airliner with 180 people depending on me, flying an aircraft I'd never trained in, with both actual pilots unconscious from carbon monoxide poisoning. The absurdity of the situation would have been funny if it wasn't absolutely terrifying. Jennifer returned with a man in his 60s, graying hair, captain's uniform. This is Captain Mitchell. He's deadheading home. He flies 737s. Thank God. I gestured to the captain's seat. I need you here. Now. Mitchell took one look at the situation and his face went professional. You're military? F-16 pilot. 12 years. I can fly anything, but I've never landed a commercial jet. I need you to be my co-pilot and talk me through the differences. He buckled into Reynolds' seat, immediately scanning the instruments. Okay, first thing, this is going to handle nothing like a fighter. She's heavy, she's slow, and she does not like sudden inputs. Treat her gentle. Roger that. What's my approach profile? For the next 15 minutes, Mitchell talked me through everything. The flight management system, the auto-throttle, the peculiarities of the 737's landing configuration. My hands were steady on the controls, but my heart was hammering. This wasn't combat. This was 180 civilians whose lives depended on me not screwing up. Flight 447, Boston Center. You're 10 miles from touchdown. Runway 27 is in sight. Emergency equipment is standing by. How are you doing? Managing, I said, my voice calmer than I felt. Beginning final approach. Mitchell guided me through the descent. Flaps 5, good. Gear down, 3 green lights were locked. Flaps 15, flaps 25, full flaps 30. Approach speed 145 knots. You're a little high on the glide slope. Bring the nose down slightly. I made tiny corrections, feeling the massive aircraft respond to my inputs. The runway was coming up fast. Too fast, my fighter pilot instinct screamed, but Mitchell kept talking in a calm, steady voice. You're doing great. Remember, the landing gear is way behind you. Wait for it. Wait for it. When you think you should flare, wait 2 more seconds, then bring the nose up gently. The runway threshold passed beneath us. 1,000 feet. 500 feet. I pulled back slightly on the yoke, feeling the aircraft settle. The main gear kissed the runway so gently I barely felt it. Reverse thrust now. Mitchell commanded. Pull the levers up and back. I did, and the engines roared, the aircraft shuddering as 180,000 pounds of metal and fuel and people decelerated. The nose gear settled onto the runway. We were down. Flight 447, perfect landing. Exit at taxiway Delta. Emergency equipment is approaching. I guided the aircraft off the runway, bringing it to a stop. My hands were shaking now, the adrenaline finally catching up. Mitchell was already on the radio, coordinating with emergency services. Within seconds, the cabin door opened and paramedics swarmed in, heading for Reynolds and the first officer. Mitchell unbuckled and turned to me, his eyes shining. That was one of the finest pieces of flying I've ever seen. What's your name? Major Evelyn Cross, United States Air Force. He extended his hand. Captain Robert Mitchell. 30 years with Delta. And Major, you just saved 180 lives with an aircraft you'd never even sat in before today. Jennifer appeared in the doorway, tears streaming down her face. Behind her, I could see passengers in the cabin, some crying, some applauding, all alive because a random F-16 pilot had been sleeping in row 10 when disaster struck. How did you know what to do? Jennifer asked. You said you'd never flown a 737. I didn't. But I've been trained to handle emergencies in aircraft moving at Mach 2 with people shooting at me. This was just a bigger plane moving slower with friendlier people. I managed a shaky smile. Though honestly, I'd rather take the combat mission. At least there I'm only responsible for my own life. A paramedic checked me for carbon monoxide exposure while another worked on Reynolds, who was starting to come around. The first officer was already on a stretcher, stable but still unconscious. The airline's chief pilot arrived within 20 minutes, along with FAA investigators and more officials than I could count. They all wanted to know the same thing. How did a military fighter pilot with no commercial training land a fully loaded 737 in an emergency? Training and instinct, I said simply. And an excellent instructor. I nodded toward Mitchell, who was giving his statement to investigators. The chief pilot, a woman named Sandra Torres, sat down across from me in the airport's crisis management room. Major Cross, on behalf of the airline and everyone on that flight, thank you. You did something extraordinary today. I just did what any pilot would do, ma'am. Most pilots couldn't have done what you did. And please call me Sandra. She paused. What were you doing on that flight? Coming home from deployment? Yes, ma'am. Sandra. 6 months in an undisclosed location, flying missions I can't talk about. I was just trying to get home, catch up on sleep, see my family. I laughed without humor. So much for a quiet flight. She smiled. Something tells me quiet isn't really your style, Major. Over the next hour, passengers started approaching me. A businessman who'd questioned my ability to help, now apologizing profusely. A mother with 2 young children, crying as she thanked me for getting her babies safely on the ground. An elderly veteran who saluted and called me a hero. I'm not a hero, I told each of them. I'm just a pilot who happened to be in the right place at the right time. But as I finally walked out of the airport and into the Boston evening, my phone exploding with messages from my Air Force squadron mates who'd somehow already heard about the emergency landing, I realized something. For 12 years, I'd flown combat missions that no one could know about. I'd saved lives in ways that would never make the news, in places that didn't officially exist, doing things that would remain classified for decades. But today I'd saved 180 people in the most public way possible. And for once, the woman who'd been sleeping in row 10, dressed like a college kid, dismissed as too young to be useful, had been exactly who everyone needed her to be. A pilot. A protector. Someone who'd spent years training for the moment when everything went wrong and someone needed to make it right. My phone buzzed with a text from my commanding officer. Nice flying, Major. Welcome home. Also, you're trending on Twitter. Enjoy your leave, you've earned it. I smiled, hailed a cab and finally headed home. Just another day in the life of someone who'd chosen to spend her life being ready for the moment when someone asked if there was a pilot on board. And this time, thank God, there was.